is May 10th, 2017, and the time is 1:13. We are doing our interview with Ada Briceño, and let's start. So, first question, what's your name?
My name is Ada Briceño.
Where were you born?
I was born in Nicaragua. I lived there for 6 years. 6 years. I was 6 years old, obviously. My brother was 2 years old. And my mother obviously lived with my mother and father. And later on, I have more siblings that were born here in the States. Well, I remember some. I remember moving into a new neighborhood where we wanted to settle, as home. And I remember playing outside with, neighbors and all being green and beautiful. And someday my mom said I couldn't go play outside anymore. And at that point, I didn't go outside for a long period of time. And when it came time to go outside, I felt like I didn't recognize my neighborhood anymore because it was so destroyed and dark rather than all the green that I remember and, the beautiful flowers and so forth because of the war. Well, my father used to be a banker for Somoza, so he was actually with the government that was in power at that time. And my mother was a homemaker. So when Somoza, when the Sandinistas took over, we had no choice but to flee, right? And so it was very dangerous. It was dangerous in general because of the civil war that was going on, but most importantly because my father's association with the president. So I have been in the United States since 1980. Many years. How many years ago was that?
37?
37. 37 years. So I went to Miami. We ended up in Miami. We lived in Miami that's where my sister was born. My mom was pregnant with my little sister, Barbara. And she was born in Miami. And my father, while we were living there for the 2 years, it was very tough. My mother was used to a different lifestyle, and so was my father. He was an economist and a banker and ran a couple of businesses. But when he came to the States, he had a hard time getting a job, obviously. And he was working as a jeweler in a mall. But it was not enough to feed the family. And so what we did was there was a job offer here in California to work in the ports as a longshoreman. And so because money was very tight, right, we decided to travel by land. And so my father and myself were traveling in a car with a friend, and my mother and my siblings were traveling in the car behind us. So in Texas, one evening, one very late night, my mother was struck by a drunk driver, a big rig. And the accident was very difficult, and my mother was hospitalized along with my siblings. And so that delayed our time here, when we arrived in California, and my father lost his opportunity as a longshoreman. But thank God that, nobody passed on in the accident. It was very serious, but, we made it out to California. At that point, we settled in Long Beach when we came to California to live with my father's uncle, where we stayed for a little while until we were able to move to San Pedro, where we lived from when I was 8 until I was 15. So I went to school there. I went to school in San Pedro from elementary, where, because I had lived a couple of years in Miami, I didn't learn much English. And so when I finally landed in a school in San Pedro, I was one of very few Latinos in that particular school. And I was forced to learn English and try to integrate. That caused me, I feel, to be behind a bit in school, especially in the first few years of school because of the language barrier. And we were often teased. It was not only myself and my brother, obviously, that went into school, but also my cousins who were under the same predicament, had come very, at a very similar time as we did, but often teased about the way we said a few words. And even now, when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, maybe because that was one of the first things I learned, in school, I find that I kept an accent in that. It's very funny how that happens. So the social economic status was very different from when I, the lifestyle that my mother and father and me to some points, right? So one of the things that I think was very glaring to me is that at 6 years old, because I had someone take care of me back home, I couldn't tie my shoes, so it took me a little bit to get going because virtually many things were done. It's a different culture, it's a different way of doing things. So I kind of felt like I was a little behind the ball from the rest of the team or the rest of the kids my age, but finally caught up. And then, we were used to many friends. Many people, even though, it was hard back home with the war, but there were many gatherings still with, friends. And in the area that we lived in San Pedro, there were not very many Latinos. And so often it was just the family. We had some people that started fleeing Nicaragua. And when we lived in Miami, they all sort of went to the same area of Miami. So we had some friends and definitely some family members in Miami. And then when we came to California, my aunt and uncle also came with us. So we had a large, my aunt and uncle also had four kids themselves. So it was a whole lot of kids, that still felt like family, and we weren't so isolated. Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I have a couple of cousins that are exactly my same age, right? And so we grew up together like sisters. Well, I had been here before, and I had been several times to Disney World. So I was pretty stoked about coming to the US. I didn't know that it wasn't going to be all like Disneyland or Disney World, right? But I had expectations that that things would be great. No, um, I think my mother and my father just felt that being safe, was important. And they were willing, and I also feel like my uncles and aunts as well, they're also willing to let go of what they had built in order to feel safe. Now I remember that on a daily occurrence, or it felt like a daily occurrence, I would get under the kitchen table because there were bombs or gunshots, in the vicinity, within our neighborhoods. So being constrained to, just the house and, often being worried about what was going to happen next, I feel was very difficult for the whole family in general. I would say in Nicaragua, I had someone that took care of me that I became very close to, and she was supposed to come with us. And 2 days before she was supposed to come with us, she left and she was killed. And so that was really tough because, it was a daily occurrence, and she would take care of me, and I was pretty dependent on her. And yeah. Thanksgiving was something new. And so that was very interesting. I arrived here on February 14th of 1980. So, it was something very different. But I just believe, like most of the, some of the holidays that we didn't have back home were things that, were eye-openers. I can't think of anything else. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, there were a lot of festivals and religious celebrations that we would have. There is something called La Purísima it's kind of like the posadas for the Mexicans, but for the Nicaraguans, we went from home to home and we sang to the Virgin Mary, and we got all kinds of goodies. Traditional, made out of, not the usual goodies that you would get here, but, things made out of fruits and just beautiful ingredients that are, mostly, Nicaraguan. So miss that a whole lot. There's not a big Nicaraguan population in here, or not that I know of. I think there's a bigger population in San Francisco. But it's really hard. It's hard to savor our food, because I think I know 3 or 4 restaurants, and mostly in Los Angeles. And I think that a few years, somebody, an aunt of mine may have done a celebration, but and back home you would do like every neighborhood, every house had a celebration. You would jump from one house to another until the night was over. That does, we just can't get that here, or not in the way that or not that I'm aware of, at least, Mm-hmm. The fact that we were safe, the fact that we were safe, that was important. So I had this teacher, Miss Logan, that I felt was, very comforting to me. It was like I was brand new at the elementary, and not a lot of English, and I just felt like she understood me, and even though I wasn't, like the A student, I still felt like the teacher's pet, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. But because I felt that she had my back, So I would say her, on top of, my family. No, I can't think of anybody that reminded me of my first home. No, I mean, I feel that I was very lucky to come with my mother and father, so that, completed me, and that my siblings were close to me. That was comforting and felt good. So, I wouldn't say it took me long. I feel like I adjusted as well as I was going to adjust in Miami. But when I feel like when I got to California, maybe when we finally had our home, right? I mean, we were living a few months with my dad's uncle, but finally when we settled into our own home, I feel that is when it started to feel like home, right? Because we had gone through a long period of time when my mother was recuperating from her accident, then living with other people to finally, settling in and feeling comfortable. I would say mostly my pictures. My parents' pictures and, my baby pictures were important. And my mom brought some really important pieces to the family of jewelry that were significant to her great grandmother, her great aunt, and grandmother. So I have a few possessions like that are meaningful. I don't. But I remember leaving the house and thinking, what happened? I was sheltered, obviously. I knew there were bombing and I knew things weren't right, but I didn't understand the extent of it until I opened that door, or the door was open and everything was destroyed around me. It was a brand new neighborhood that we had moved into just a year prior to leaving. I frankly don't remember arriving there. I would say that they're prompted by some pictures. But, I remember breaking my tooth in the pool. Breaking my tooth in the pool while I was trying to, get in it. So, yeah. It's probably because you don't often break your teeth, right? Yes, a couple of times. I went back in 1990 with my father. It was a little frightening because, my country has been in political turmoil for a long time, and we didn't know how my father was going to be received. And so we went back in 1990, and then I believe in 2008 I took my son. So I went a couple of times. So many of my family members have moved back, especially my father's siblings moved back, and some of my mother's nieces and nephews moved back. So we went to see a lot of family. And we actually stayed in the same home where I used to live as a child. So it was odd, they had opened my room and combined it with my mother's room. So it's like one big living room now. And so it was great to be able to tell my son, oh, this is where my bed was. This is where my TV was. Very different. Not like I remembered it. Much smaller than what I remembered because I'm actually, bigger now. But it was, I was able to tell some stories. Remember the spaces. Remember playing outside with my dad. And different Christmas and just different things that I got to tell him, and he fell in love with the food. The mosquitoes love to bite us, so I wasn't very thrilled about that, but enjoyed seeing family, enjoyed walking through the same streets. The first time I went there, my grandfather was still alive, and we walked the neighborhood. And what happens in Nicaragua is that, people, grandparents, they sit outside in the porch and just watch pass-byers, right? And so I must have spent I was 15 at that time when I went the first time. I must have spent like 2 or 3 mornings just for 3 or 4 hours walking through the neighborhoods and sitting down with grandparents and just, other people's grandparents and just talking to them about the U.S., So it was boring because I was 15, but today I'm so thankful that I got to do that and that he was able to take me around. Yeah. I don't remember if it was his idea, but I'm sure it was. Yeah, and it was very difficult to see, having been in the States and going back and seeing the poverty levels. Not to say that we don't have very high poverty levels in the U.S. and homeless people, like but to see your people, have that is difficult. Hmm. Yes and no, because my first language was Spanish, or is Spanish, and I'm very Nicaraguan. I feel like like this country has taken me in, and I feel American, but most of all and first of all from Nicaragua, right? Um, so part of me feels like I kept the best of my country within my soul, right? Music I love in Spanish, you know, just in general, I mostly connect a lot with the Hispanic culture. So, and I feel like I get to have that here. I don't know that I would have felt this my home if there wasn't a large Latino presence here. So, I don't go there as often because I feel like I get to have the best of both here. I think there continues to be tremendous barriers. Um, but it's really up to us, right? Like I've decided to fight against those barriers. And, throughout my whole life, throughout my whole career, throughout my youth, I've been discriminated against, I feel like, most of my time here. But that doesn't stop me, and I keep fighting and making sure that I open doors and allow other people to have the same rights, or want the same rights as every American in this country should have.
Thank you for that.
Sure. But thank you guys for listening to me and for recording it.
Thank you for coming in.
Sure.